morning, everybody, and thank you for joining straight after the keynote with a fresh cup of coffee. I hope the coffee will keep you awake. I've been told you've been seated very comfortably. I'll try my best to keep you awake while we are going to discuss server-side Java web applications today. Before we get started, and actually to activate you a little bit, can I please ask you to grab your phone? Because I've got a quick poll and I want to prevent having to count a raise of hands and that kind of stuff. So could you please scan the QR code and answer that poll for me? Now, I told you I would try to keep you awake, right? And if this doesn't wake you up in the morning, then I don't know what does. All joking aside, I have a real vote for you. I'm sure you want me to scan it myself as well so that you can see you're not getting rickrolled again, or? No, that was the previous one. This one should not point you to YouTube anymore, and I hope it has been. It's getting proved by the fact that some people are already voting, and you can see how the votes are coming in at this point.
Does anyone know the Wi-Fi code for?
It's Java Congress Pate with a capital J and a capital P. Everybody who wants to participate has been able to do so?
No, my option is not there.
Your option is not there, all right. Yeah, but we already discussed that before we started, right? I might have included a blank vote or something else, but I wanted to keep it short and simple, all right? With that out of the way, thank you for this. Let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Maarten Mulders. You can follow me on all professional social media and Twitter on the under the username of mthmulders. I'm a Java champion. I'm an Oracle Ace Pro, working at Info Support company nearby in Veenendaal. Also a regular contributor and PMC member of the Apache Maven project. Part of my work is consulting. Actually, it's a rather large part of my work, and advising customers of InfoSupport in how to build certain solutions. And that I often see teams that start building web applications with the question that I just showed you. What are we going to do? React, Angular, Vue, Svelte. I probably forgot the one that got released yesterday, but there's obviously a new JavaScript framework being released yesterday, and I just don't know the name yet. And I will argue today, and I hope to convince you today, that that is not the first question to ask. We're going to discuss single-page web applications and what is actually wrong with them. I'm going to discuss the basics of server-side rendering, cover a few architecture styles, a few implementation examples, and then we'll have a wrap-up. So what is wrong with a single-page web apps? And I do realize that there's a certain risk that that this will sound a little bit like this old man that you saw in the second keynote ranting at all those modern stuff, and I basically don't understand, or at least that's the feeling that people might have. That's not the goal of today. It's not my goal to be the old man ranting at all the modern stuff that I don't understand. But we have to be honest that building a single-page application brings a few challenges that we have been discovering in the past decade when single-page web apps really became very popular, maybe even ubiquitous. And on the way we discovered, hey, there's a few disadvantages. Just a quick recap, what do I mean with a single-page web app? Typically, JavaScript web applications follow a pattern like this, where we see that your browser navigates to a certain web page, get an HTML file which is almost empty, except it refers a few JavaScript bundles and probably a few style sheets. Your browser starts requesting the JavaScript bundles and the CSS files, tries to parse and execute the whole JavaScript, and then eventually a bit of content is displayed on the screen. That's how it often goes, right? And then as soon as you start interacting with that web application, you click on something, more JavaScript gets executed, some API call might be run in the background, fetching a bit more data, manipulating some data maybe, and then getting back to the user interface to get updated eventually. Luckily, your users, at least we hope, they have powerful devices with a lot of computing power, fast JavaScript engines in their browsers, and this all should not take too much time, but we cannot deny the fact that there are a few delays here in the process, especially that first bit where we have an empty HTML file or almost empty, there's not much content, and your user can only watch the page being built and being rendered. And that brings me to the first disadvantage of single-page web applications, which is the initial load time. Let's look, for example, at two popular sites in our profession, Stack Overflow and GitHub. What you can see is that the initial HTML document that gets transmitted over the wire is not really large, a few hundred kilobytes, but then several megabytes of JavaScript get downloaded. And if you are in your office or at home, you probably have a decent internet connection. If you're here, you may, well, it might be a bit worse because there's there's a lot of developers here and they all use the same Wi-Fi, but still it's reasonably fast. We live in the Netherlands, we have decent 4G, 5G coverage in almost all of the country. This is maybe except one or few more rural areas, but usually we have fast mobile internet as well as wired internet. But still, there's quite a bit of stuff getting downloaded, probably even for use cases that we don't need in the first few seconds of us being on that web page. If you're interested in this, by the way, there's a nice tool, it's called Lighthouse, developed by Google, which actually measures these kind of things. And they give a whole lot of numbers about your web application and how it performs from a user point of view. A few that might be interesting for you are the first contentful paint, the total blocking time. With the first contentful paint means how long it takes for something more or less relevant to be visible on the screen. The total blocking time is how much time the user is blocked from doing anything on your page. See, by the way, that GitHub takes 3 seconds for you before you can actually interact with the homepage of GitHub. If you just go to github.com and you wait a little bit, you have to wait 3 seconds before you can do something. Stack Overflow does it way better. It's only 300 milliseconds. Well, it's the blink of an eye. When Tom did this, the light went out. I'm not going to do that, but I all of a sudden I realized. Largest contentful paint is also an interesting one. It's like, the first one was something relevant is being displayed on the screen. The largest contentful paint is like, this is where Lighthouse thinks the majority of your page is there. The large and relevant part that you are interested in. And cumulative layout shifts is also interesting because when you build the page gradually, maybe blocks on your page shift a little bit in where they are on the page, and all of a sudden they might jump to the left or to the right. That's typically kind of behavior that you do not like. So these measurements can really be interesting to see how your current solution works. So what I'm trying to say here, the initial loading time can really make an impact on your user experience. And you need to investigate, to gather numbers, and see if it is enough for what you're trying to build. Second reason why single-page applications may not always be your best fit is when search engine integration is important for you. I mean, sometimes you build something that's only for internal use, right? It's kind of a helping system for some department in your company. But sometimes you build a solution that needs to be accessible through the internet, maybe even for unauthenticated users to visit. And well, then it is important for your organization, for your website to be so that it can be found by Google, by DuckDuckGo, you name them all. And how does that work? Well, these search engines, they have crawlers. The crawler acts like a spider, walks through his web, visits a page, tries to make sense of the page, and looks for references to different pages. Now imagine what a crawler has to do. The poor spider that retrieves your web page and gets greeted with 2.5 megabytes of JavaScript. All of a sudden, spiders need to understand JavaScript. I asked this spider in my garden, he did not know JavaScript. He did not know any programming language at all. This really means something for the spiders that I'm referring to here, the ones that do index the internet in order to make a search engine work. Because it makes their work a lot harder. And they have to make interpretations about when will the JavaScript really be done executing, and can I safely assume that all the content is really on the page, and then, only then, start processing the content and trying to make sense and extract references to other pages. And then repeat that, of course, until eternity. But yeah, that empty page that they get first, they need to be aware of the fact that it's probably not really that interesting for them, and that they only can start the looking for references once they have downloaded enough JavaScript and actually run it. Single-page applications are also harder for accessibility. What we see here is a braille display, the type of device that people with a visual impairment use. You put your fingers on it and it pops up little spikes so that you can actually feel the letters and in that way read what's on the web page. But how does a braille display work when it initially gets an empty HTML page? Again, it has to somehow understand that, well, maybe the page is not yet fully loaded. Maybe there is still content to add on the page before actually trying to start extracting the content. Same holds, by the way, for screen readers, the type of software, usually it's software, that reads the page out loud if you don't have a braille display at hand. Both heavily rely on structure and metadata of a page, and if that only gets available a few seconds later, it makes it harder for those types of helping tools to really know when it makes sense to support their user. Same dragons apply as with web crawlers. Security gets more harder with single-page applications because, of course, we need to protect our data. Of course, we need to verify if you can download data or change data, but now we basically have to do it twice. We want to do it in the user interface first, because we don't want the user to see options that we most likely are not going to approve of. But then we have to do it again in the remote API that it actually gets triggered by our web application because, well, those are separate systems. Never trust your input, golden rule. So they cannot assume that the front end already verified that you are authorized to view data or modify data. And then finally, although this one is becoming less relevant over the years, especially in the early days of JavaScript, there used to be a lot of people that said, well, JavaScript all nice and great, but I'm not going to enable that in my browser. I don't want somebody else to influence the code that runs on my machine. So they run their browser without JavaScript. I'm not sure if that is still possible, but in any way we need to be aware of the fact that things can go wrong. I think it was already mentioned in the second keynote. The network is unreliable, so we still have some kind of a fallback. We have to make sure that even in less optimal conditions, our application will still work. And the answer to all of this, if you have been around in the JavaScript world in the past decade, unfortunately, though drum roll, only a picture of a drum roll, is server-side rendering. Okay, we can't call it server-side rendering because that sounds boring, so let's call it pre-rendering or server hydration, which sounds a lot better, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing. And guess what? We've already had this in the Java ecosystem for over 20 years. But 10, 15 years ago, we said, oh man, that is so old school. That is so boring. That is so 1995. We can't do this anymore right now because we have single-page web apps and that's going to be the future. Well, guess it was not the future in itself. Maybe there were some good things in server-side rendering that we started to throw out of the window a little bit too enthusiastically. So I would like to discuss briefly with you what server-side rendering is and how it at least addresses a few of the concerns that we saw. First of all, I like this picture because it is at least 50% shorter than the previous one. Server-side rendering, in essence, you navigate to a web page, you ask for a web page, and you get back a web page. That's the first part. I like it because it's simple, it's concise, it's very easy to reason about. And when that gets returned, you have content that you can display in the web browser immediately. And the relevant content is just there. The buttons are there, they're clickable, and whatnot. And now if I want to interact with a page, I want to click on a link, I want to click on a button, I want to enter some data, it's basically the same pattern. I submit a form, an HTML form, I get back a new HTML page, and it has all the content that I'm looking for. And all the relevant data is immediately there without me having to wait for something else to be retrieved, only then to be able to see, oh, I made a mistake and my social security number is incorrect or whatnot. My email address does not meet the expectation of the developer at hand. So when would it make sense to do this kind of stuff? Because let's be honest, just like single-page applications aren't the answer to every problem, I'm not going to tell you today that server-side rendering is the answer to every problem. But there are a few scenarios in which I think it really makes sense to at least consider using server-side rendering. And the first one may not come as a surprise. If search engine optimization is really important to you, it could really be a good consideration to think, hey, should I ensure that the page is populated with meaningful content as soon as possible, preferably on the first page load already. It's going to make the life of the crawler easier. They will more easily extract the relevant stuff from your pages, making it so that they have a better idea of what is there and for what users your page might be interesting. Second, and this is not really a yes/no. This is more of a scale. The simpler your user interface is, the more I would encourage you to consider server-side rendering. The simple thing is, sometimes we have really complex user interfaces, but sometimes we also have really trivial user interfaces, right? There's 5 inputs, there's 2 buttons, there's no complex layouting, there's no dynamic stuff popping up when you click here, something else should appear. Sometimes it's just as simple as enter a form, click submit, and you're done. Not every user interface is a Hollywood star, and not every user interface has to be or wants to be a Hollywood star. Third situation in which you could consider server-side rendering is when you are limited in terms of times or budget. If you're really in a pressure cooker to deliver quickly, would it really make sense to start building a REST API and another application, which is your single page web app? You're basically building two code bases. They have to be in sync. They have to be in sync on the contract of those APIs. You have to deploy them both. They probably have different tooling, so you need to understand the tools. You need to understand the whole ecosystem, basically, of both your backend and your front-end language. And of course, you could build your backend in Node.js as well, but then still different libraries apply, different best practices applied for those libraries. If you are in a hurry, maybe you want something simple. And this is especially the case if you are building a proof of concept. You just want to quickly spike that technology A and B are compatible. You want something simple to just prove that you can compute this or that you can interact with a remote service that lives somewhere else out of your hands. But you want to quickly, yeah, we can make this work, right? Get the trust that your plan for building the whole solution is going to work out. Then really, do you need to build two applications, an API on the one hand and a single page on the application on the other hand? Or could you just, for the sake of the argument, say, okay, if I just get a white HTML page with black letters in Times New Roman, it's going to be fine for me. But at least I proved I could make the interesting stuff work. And then later you can always evaluate and make it more complex. And then finally, and this is also an interesting one because it's really context dependent. Sometimes you know upfront that not all your users have high-end devices, have super reliable and fast networks. I heard this story about somebody who was backpacking in Southern America and wanted to look for a campsite. And he grabbed his mobile phone because he was told this or that site is going to work out great. And it did work out great on the Wi-Fi of the person that built it. But when you are in the middle of nowhere, somewhere in Southern America, and you have, well, 2 bars of 2G internet connection, and you try to download 2.5 megabytes of JavaScript, it's going to take a whole lot of time before you finally find that there's no campsite around here. And you have to move to a different place to find so. This is really context dependent, as I said, because if you're building something internal for your company, everybody is connected to a super high speed network. But if your users are spread throughout the country, maybe they're on the go traveling with 100 or even 200 kilometers an hour, maybe you know that the target audience for your website may also include people that, well, do not have the typical high-end device, but have middle-end or low-end devices. Does it make sense to shift all the compute to their side? Or maybe consider something that keeps in mind that, well, their connection or their client device is less powerful than your shiny MacBook M4 or whatever the latest model is. So let me illustrate with a few use cases. The first one you already saw, you already used it. The voting application that I used at the very beginning is completely server rendered. There's no JavaScript involved. I was not hurt, JavaScript was not hurt, nobody got hurt. There is a bit of dynamic stuff because you maybe saw the graph being updated live. More on that later, but it did not involve JavaScript that I had to write. So that's one example. Second example, it's this application that I wrote myself. I'm sorry for the white background, by the way, because that might be hurting your eyes after all the dark backgrounds. It's just a simple application that I wrote. I have DMARC on my private domains, and I want to make sure that no emails get shipped from spammers that claim to be sending email on behalf of me. So I configured DMARC. You can Google that if you are interested about it. But that means I also get back DMARC reports. And I want to be able to see how many of these reports do I get, and are there any abnormalities in there. So this is just a server-side rendered application with a simple dashboard, and I can click on the dashboard. I can browse the data that I got collected. Oh, apparently somebody sent cat.png rather than a DMARC report. Might have been me. Not sure. And I can just click through, browse these reports, browse these errors. I consider this a simple user interface. There's nothing too fancy about this. So why go through the pain of building two applications here? And then finally, my latest pet project, or probably graveyard project in the making, because we all know how that goes, right? A web application where I can register mileage of my electric car in the hope of computing my average energy consumption. The app that comes with the car does not report about it, so I figured I could probably build something myself. Again, really no hard user interface requirements. Oh, I thought it was still authenticated. Sorry about that. It's just a simple list of vehicles that I could register, and measurements. Oh well, I'm not that far. As I said, it's on the path to getting to my GitHub graveyard. But again, it's not so complex. It's a few tables, a few buttons, and there we basically have it. All right, enough about that. Let's move to the more practical side. How are we going to build these things? And I want to discuss two major architecture styles that I see in all the implementations that are currently available in the Java ecosystem. The first one is an action-based architecture, also named a push style. Why is it push? Because when your user downloads, starts interacting with the page, it actually requests a page that gets mapped to a controller. The controller being a simple, or maybe not simple, that depends on you. Being a Java class, you have to implement it yourself. It retrieves the model from remote services, from a database, I don't know, I don't care. Optionally, it operates on that model. Eventually, it will select a view and say to the view engine, look, here's a view, here's a piece of model, could you please render that for me? So it basically pushes data into a template and then asks the template to get rendered. And the result of that is hopefully beautiful HTML, which gets sent back to the browser. Examples in modern Java include Jakarta MVC, which uses either Jakarta server pages or Jakarta faces as its view technology. Spring MVC has been around for a very long time, which supports Java server pages as well. Jakarta server pages, sorry. Jakarta faces as a view engine. Recently, FimeLeaf was added, and I think they will support a few more, but I just don't know them all. Quarkus has added server-side rendering to their portfolio, and they have developed their own templating language, which is really cute, if I can say so. And there's even the way older frameworks like Struts. Don't fear. The Struts is not that; it's just less popular. But well, we can say it's proven technology, right? Free market velocity, server pages, whatever. It supports a broad range of templating language, and I think we can say there's something for everybody. If you're more like, I want to use the latest stuff, well, maybe you will drop Struts and move to Quarkus because, oh, Quarkus is happening, it's shiny. But they still have these kind of techniques for you. And the other style is called component style or pool. And this is really an excuse for me to use a picture of a train because I'm a bit of a self-declared train lover. The main pattern there looks slightly different. You request a view, the view is actually a bit of, well, it's usually a declarative thing that describes what the user interface should look like. The controller that actually selects it is not implemented by you, but is a more of a generic one. So what happens, your view says, hey, I want to use a little bit of controller logic here, I want to use some domain stuff, and it starts pulling it in. Rather than a controller pushing the model to the view pulls in the relevant pieces of model that it wants to work with and that it needs to display. And if your application does handle user inputs, well, you operate on that model. You could add some glue code in between to make it look shiny and to isolate stuff a little bit, but that's basically the pattern there. The view is can refer other views so that you can actually reuse certain components. These can also pull in pieces of model, and that's how that works. Eventually, the whole view renders into HTML, which might come as no surprise, gets sent back to the browser. Examples of these, Jakarta Faces, previously known as Java Server Faces or JSF. Apache Wikit follows this pattern, Vaadin follows this pattern. And here I'm not listing view technologies because the view technology is basically a given when you, for example, you say I'm going to use Jakarta Faces, that is already the view technology. And the way you implement your domain and your business logic, that is really up to you. All right. We've seen the two major architecture styles. Let's move on to some implementations and see what that code actually really looks like. I've selected two. Both are based on the Jakarta ecosystem because that is, I believe, the most open ecosystem that we have currently. But whatever I'm going to show you in terms of code right now, things will look pretty different if you would have selected Spring MVC or Quarkus or all the other ones. Let's first look at the application that I used for the voting. I have a controller here. As I said, the controller needs to be implemented by yourself. So this is my controller for showing you a QR code and the live graph of votes being cast. And the most interesting part here is really this method, the show method. I'm annotating with standard annotations like produces, like path, like get. These are the same in JAX-RS because actually Jakarta MVC builds on top of JAX-RS. So if you know JAX-RS, you know the basics of Jakarta MVC as well. And really the implementation is, in a way, not that complicated. I'm retrieving something from my database using a repository that gives me an optional poll. I use it to populate the model and the response, to populate the model and prepare the response. And that's just a JAX-RS response. And if there's no answer, because, for example, the slug does not exist, then I will return a simple not found response, which is, again, standard JAX-RS stuff. Preparing the model and the response is a matter of saying I have a model instance variable from this controller, and I want to put a few objects in that model under a certain key. And then if we move to the view, what do we see? We see that we retrieve something from the model. So for instance here, we say we know that in the model there is an object called poll. We've put it there ourselves. It has a question property. So we want to include that in our HTML here. And this, if you ask me, is in that way really elegant because the view is immediately telling me what data is being showed here. I don't have to do inference in my head like, oh wait, that came from this or that remote API, which got populated in that way, and so that probably it means that I will see this or that here. It's just in plain sight. Interacting with a poll is a similar thing. So for instance, here we have an HTML form. For each option that the poll offers you to vote on, make an input, give it a value, and show the display value. So that's basically the human readable label for it. And there's a button where that you can use to submit. I've also included a hidden input here, which is MVC CSRF name, which maps quite nicely, if you ask me, to the fact that here I can have one simple annotation, CSRF protected, on the method that will handle the form submission. If I have that line in my form, and if I have this annotation on my Java method, I automatically get CSRF protection, so you cannot submit a vote without having to retrieve the form first and actually got hold of that CSRF token. Well, processing the vote works in a similar way. Find the poll that we are voting for. If we find it, cast the vote that the user submitted in the HTML form. When that succeeds, prepare the response after a successful vote. If it fails, prepare the response after an unsuccessful vote. And if there's no such poll, again, we do a not found. To me, and I do realize this is a matter of taste, but to me this is pretty compact code, not too convoluted with accidental details. It tells the story of what I want to achieve. The second implementation that I want to walk through with you is a Jakarta Faces-based application. And for that I'm going to use the vehicle mileage registration example that I showed earlier, this one. It uses Jakarta MVC, as I said. So we start with the view this time. What we see is we have we define a piece of user interface. We have I really like this part, for example. We have a data table which will iterate over vehicles, assigning each element the variable vehicle. And then we say, okay, the data table has these columns. I don't even write the iteration myself, see? I'm just declaring I want a table, these are the rows, and for each row I want you to populate these columns. Go figure. It's not my problem to write a for loop. And then there's a column here with some buttons that corresponds, of course, to this part of the screen. Handling user input, works in a slightly different way. I have a dialog that can pop up where I say, okay, I have a panel that consists of a few rows. Each row corresponds with a piece of input, and then there's a few buttons. This is where it gets interesting, because when I press a button, I want to invoke a Java method in the corresponding code. So let's look at the Java code for that. Which one was I looking at? Save vehicle, right? That lives over here. There was already a selected vehicle because the dialog was popping up. Oh wait, maybe I should actually show how that works. It's as simple as this. Oh, already not logged in anymore. I'm sorry about that. Maybe I should give it a longer timeout before logging out. Like this, a dialog pops up. I can change the description of the vehicle like so. So what I'm seeing there is I had a vehicle selected. I'm going to update it with whatever was changed in the user interface. Note that I'm not writing any code here that says retrieve this from the view or retrieve this from the request. parse the HTML form. It's all not there. Jakarta Server Faces fixes that for me. And I'm just declaring there's an input which populates a piece of model. And the model is modified. So I already know when I'm here in the Java code, and I would point my debugger to stop here, I am already sure that selected vehicle was updated with whatever the user typed, without me writing any explicit code for this. I'll ask my repository to update the vehicle and emit a message saying that updating the vehicle was successful. And then there's a few things here that are specific to the fact that I use prime faces as a JSF implementation. This is completely optional, but in my experience, it gives you a nice toolkit of standard user interface elements that, that you can already use. All right, back here. You already saw that. I had that here just in case my IDE would not work or whatever. We've seen all this, we've seen all this. Yep, we've also seen all this. Now, you might be tempted to say, that's all great, but I need more interaction. I want a dynamic user interface, or maybe I don't want it per se because but I have a product owner who says that I need it. Or I have a customer journey specialist or a user experience guru that tells me I should do this. And this whole idea of pressing a button, submitting a form, waiting for the form to be rendered, blah, 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 it takes too long. Well, you can still benefit from server-side rendering. The example that I did with the bar graph that gets updated immediately whenever you vote. As I said, I did not write a single letter of JavaScript for that, and I still hold on to that. I have to be honest, somebody else did. Somebody else wrote a little bit of JavaScript, created HTMX, which is a library that lets you declaratively say things like, I want this piece of the document object model to be updated every 5 seconds by requesting this or that page, selecting a little bit from the HTML that gets rendered and mounting it here in my page. Maybe I can even show where that happens, just to give you an idea. I should be able, right? Yeah, here it is already. So what I'm doing here, I'm saying, okay, get /votes, /show, /whatever, some kind of a slug for the poll /votes, trigger it every 5 seconds, and there's a document object model identified by poll summary, and I want to swap the inner HTML of that with whatever gets back from doing this HTTP request. If I see this, I don't feel like I'm writing JavaScript here. So, and then we obviously we need a place where we actually, oh yeah, that's here. This controller will actually return only that piece of HTML, and it looks a little bit different. I could have done a bit more refactoring, but hey, I'm the product owner and the developer, so I get to decide on the priorities for this pet project, and I figured this was just great. So no JavaScript involved from my perspective. By using HTMX, and you could also add other micro libraries like Alpine.js, you can declaratively say, here's a little bit of dynamic interaction, whether it is something that triggers periodically or whether it is something that happens upon a user click. This is what should happen. If you are in a component-based architecture, I really advise you to look at, for example, for Jakarta Server Faces, I already mentioned prime faces. Why? Because out of the box, server faces will be just like HTML. So white background, Times New Roman font, font size 12. Not really the most appealing user interface, if you ask me. And kits like prime faces give you out of the box a suite of a nice collection of user interface components that you can, well, you can't drag and drop them on your page literally, but it's not really a lot more work than that. Same holds, by the way, for Vaadin or Wicked. They provide you with toolkits and ready-to-go user interface components that also include dynamic behavior, like if I press this button, that Java method should be called. And I don't need to write all the lower level details for this. The second objection that I had when I was preparing this talk was, Maarten, that's not fair. It's only been a few years back. You were at a large room in Stockholm. I saw you there and you were saying, I can teach you React in 45 minutes. Now, why all of a sudden are you saying that single page applications are bad? Well, as I hopefully made clear in the beginning already, and also throughout this talk, I'm not saying React is bad. I'm not saying any single page application framework is bad. Quite the opposite. I think there are really good situations when you need them and when you should definitely consider using them and make a deliberate choice which one. What I'm trying to say here is both single page applications and server-side rendering have their use cases where they can shine and where it makes sense, where it is probably in your context the best fit to select. Make a conscious choice. Don't go with the hype of everybody is doing single page applications these days and that's why I have to do it too. You're in charge of making the right decision, whether it is for your own employer or a company that you're consulting for. They look at you because you're the expert. They hire you because they don't know it themselves. And if you blindly follow the hype, you're not adding much value to them. Quite the opposite, I would say, because even large language models can do that these days. It makes sense to hire you because you can make a deliberate choice and take into account the whole context, the whole situation, the whole background, and then advise upon it is the best idea to do it this way or that way. I'm going to wrap it up, and if I am correct, then we do have a little bit of time of questions at the end. Otherwise, well, we'll see in a minute. I have another poll for you. No rickrolling this time, don't worry. And I'm just curious to see, well, actually, if my message, if I was successful in transferring the message to you. So that's basically what I'm trying to verify here. You can, of course, still select either option. It's completely fine with me. "38 votes, 40 votes. So even more people got to vote, which is really great. 42, I should stop now because this is obviously the ultimate answer. I'm really happy to see actually that a lot of people say it depends, not only because it's a stereotype of our industry, but also because apparently I was able to make you aware of, hey, there's no golden bullet, there's no single answer, and this should always be your go-to choice. That would be really my first takeaway for this morning. Challenge the we need a single page app for this attitude that may live in your team, that may live in your company. There are alternatives, and it makes sense to consider these alternatives. And as a professional, you are in the ultimate position to challenge this default behavior. The second thing to take home is the two main architecture styles, push-based, action-based, or pull-based, component-based. Both have their pros and cons, obviously. When it comes to implementations, no a few frameworks and toolkits that you could use. You don't have to understand them all, but at least it helps you in figuring out what to Google for. And maybe it is even something that you can try at home and just build this simple thing in order to experiment a little bit, get a little bit of feeling how it works, whether you like it or not. That is a matter of taste after all, and the only way to find out is by browsing documentation or writing a little bit of code yourself and seeing how it behaves, how well do I like the debugging experience, how well do I like the tooling that comes with it. Also allow yourself to experiment a little bit with these micro frameworks like HTMX or Alpine, because if all you need is a little bit of dynamic interaction on your page, then still you could do just fine with server-side rendering. With that, I've come to the end of what I would like to discuss with you. Thank you for being here again. Please take the time now or later today to rate this talk in the app. I'm completely fine with whatever rating you give. To me, it's more relevant to know what you took away from it, what the kind of stuff that you liked or did not like, because that really helps me to improve this talk for the next iteration. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take some, and if there are none, then I wish you a very pleasant continuation of JFall. I see already one raised hand. Yes, please.
A little bit of context before I ask the question. Coming from a Sturz, JSF, EDF background, the challenge I faced when using server-side rendering, that I can finish my business logic in a day, but it took me a week to finish the HTML layout.
Mm-hmm.
Suggestions or direction, if somebody wants to pick this up, how do they approach the front-end side of it? Because layouting and CSS
is a hard problem. Yes, I think many of us can actually feel the pain, especially when it comes to CSS. In my experience, for those who maybe have not heard the complete question, implementing the business logic is easy. And if I may add to that, I can write unit tests that actually prove that I did it correctly. But getting the user interface correctly is hard. It depends a little bit, of course, if you are in charge of what the user interface looks like, or if you have to work according to a design that somebody else built. These pet projects have the big advantage, as said it before, I'm the product owner and the developer, so whatever I am able to get working is usually perfectly fine. You might not always be in that situation. To me, it really helps to use these kind of toolkits for this. The voting application, I used a lot of Tailwind, I don't know the exact pronunciation, just to get something that looks appealing enough for me. The vehicle application, it's pre-built components from Prime Faces. The email reports application, it's pre-built components on top of Tailwind with, I think it's called Daisy UI. I'm not 100% sure. So it can be interesting to look at these component libraries. On one hand, because it gives your designer an idea of, if you don't know what to do, maybe consider using this. If it's good enough for what we're building. And if you're building large internal systems, or external systems, by the way, could also happen, that do require a corporate look and feel, it might even be, but I'm saying this with a little bit of precaution, an option to build your own. To build your own component library and say, okay, if we want an input, then it should always look like this. It should always behave like this. So reuse is really the key there. You want to avoid doing it all over again the same time, and then if somebody changes their mind in terms of what the design should look like, you have to change it hundreds of times. Yes, please.
So one thing I didn't, or one difference I saw is that if you're building a React component, you at least have TypeScript,
Mm-hmm.
And you can do more validations, but then if I look at your views, I only see strings and stuff in calling functions, methods, it's all strings. How do you still have some of that type safety?
How about type safety when building components? Because the only typing we have is stringly typed rather than strongly typed stuff with, for example, TypeScript. Yeah, that's harder. I have to admit that. Well, maybe there are solutions to that. I don't know them from heart. On the other hand, not all of us are building component libraries every day. Sometimes it is enough to say, I have a user interface, I have a visual test, for instance, performed by a human, that it looks okay, and from then on I can do snapshot testing, take screenshots when I change something, and if the screenshot differs too much from a previous iteration, then either this is an expected change, we can approve of it, or, hey, this is not what we expected, probably something broke. That could be enough, but there again, it depends on your context. Anybody else? Yes, please.
Yeah, you showed a lot of pros of going server-side rendering, but I was wondering then what would be for you the top reason for choosing single-page application?
Top reason for single-page applications. The more complex your user interface gets, the more you want to leverage practices like, for example, testing, like strongly typed declaration of the view and the logic that comes with the view. So that could really be a good situation to consider single-page applications. Also, if you have a larger project at hand and you have dedicated teams that that specialize in front-end development, for instance, I would not advise to try and convince to learn them JSF, which is XML based, and they'll probably be scared anyway. And they're probably very familiar with the whole NPM ecosystem, all the tools that come with it, and they're probably more fluent than you and I together. And okay, I don't put much weight in there. In using this to build a professional, good-looking user interface. So that could also be a situation to consider. Single-page applications. All right, that was it for now. If you happen to have any other questions, I'll be around the whole day. You can find me at the booth where they also have tosties. So might be a nice combination. Enjoy your day.